shape, or form. So feel free to swear and curse and all the fun.
Awesome. All my favorite things in one go.
Sweet. Hi, guys.
Hell yeah.
Welcome back to more drinking. Today we are going to be tasting Wanderback whiskey, which is a Oregon single malt. We are massive fans, I think, as anyone who's ever watched the show, the total of the 6 of them. We love our single malt here in Oregon, and it's kind of that really amazing thing that Oregon really helped define as a category. And with us today is Wanderback and Anna, who is the representative of it. So we have batch 1, 2, and then we're going to skip to 4. And then, as Anna's already kind of made us feel a little bit bad, we don't the new and improved 5.
We'll make sure to leave our address to make sure we get 5.
There we go. Perfect. Absolutely good to do. Great.
So tell us a little bit about Wanderback.
Yeah, so Wanderback has a really unique approach in that we collaborate with other distilleries in order to make our whiskey. So Phil is someone who really loves whiskey. He's our founder. And he loves to work with people and learn all they can and just work with different folks. And so he came up with this concept. So we take our mash bill that he kind of worked on, and we go to different distilleries, and he's there during the production process, and they distill the whiskey there for us, and then we bring it back to Hood River, Oregon, and mature it there, and then we do finishing and bottling and everything on the farm. So it's it's a little different than other places that might purchase or source or something like that, because we're working directly with them and collaborate and kind of, may take some processes that they do that make them unique and kind of fold it into our own. So
you're actually going in with, that's just for people that don't know, you're not just going in and say, give me 10 barrels. You're going in, here's the mash bill we want our hands on the process of doing it. I think that's what separates what you're doing from sourcing, what people call sourcing.
Yeah, exactly. So the ones that we're going to taste tonight are in our Evergreen collection, which was done in collaboration with Westland, which is, up here in Seattle. We love them. And so Phil worked directly with Matt Hoffman and kind of figured out the grain bill and the yeast that we were going to use. And he was there on the production days and kind of oversaw it. And the same thing with batch 5. He went down to Balcones and was there for it, and the same thing for our future. So it's fun and how each is a little different. And then it's sort of like, I like to think of it as the best kind of science experiment, because we get to taste how different things affect the whiskey, since the mash bill is the same. So, is the yeast different, or how is their fermentation different? How does that affect the distillate? And then we're looking at the different still shapes and how does that affect the distillate and the flavor that comes out of it. And then we have our kind of baseline of maturing in Hood River. So that really, is kind of our start and end point. And then everything else in the middle is kind of the levers we get to pull and kind of see how it changes. It's really fun. I love it.
And so let's be honest, with every
maturing
batch, it's the same.
Sorry?
I'm sorry. With every batch, it's the same mash bill?
Yeah, there was a slight tweak into the batch 5 one, but the grains that we were using were the same, but the ratios were slightly changed. But for the ones we're going to taste tonight, all of that spirit was distilled on the same runs. So, and then it's only just the age and finishing barrels that are different. So that's what's really cool about this too. We get to really kind of see in a vertical tasting kind of fashion. Richard, what was your question?
Well, I was going to say, and maturing it in barrels in Hood River is going to be completely different than anywhere else. Yeah. I mean, you guys get real winters, you get pretty hot summers. You know what I mean? It's way more of I'd be cutting out the humidity that you get in Kentucky. I would probably say your temperature swing has got to be one of the biggest that you could get, with the exception of maybe like Colorado. You know what I mean? But
yeah, at least definitely on the West Coast, because it's not as temperate as, like Skagit Valley or something like that. Yeah, I mean, right now we've got a bunch of snow on the ground. And this summer I was doing barrel work in 100-degree weather. So yeah, that definitely affects the whiskey and the maturation. Yeah.
Well, let's start with 1.
Okay. Do you want any, what would you like to know about this, or do you want to go in blind and then we'll talk about it after?
Well, Chad is the newbie, So we try to we let him taste first and see what he says, so we
Okay.
don't cloud his mind.
And
Oh.
I guess we'll go over the whole premise for Anna here and anyone who's actually listening to this. I'm your bartender nerd who knows kind of the science of things. Richard here is a massive collector when it comes to whiskey. He just loves, he's gotten really into it. And when him and I connected over this whole thing, he introduced me to Chad, a friend of his, and Chad was wanting to get into whiskey. And so we figured that we kind of have this show of like, all right, here's nerd over here. Here's, smart collector, the financial point of view. And here's Chad who's like, I don't know, whatever the hell you're all talking about, but there's words that are flying over my head. I'm going to bring you all back down to earth and make sure that you're speaking still English that human beings can understand.
It's a great concept, especially I would say, just from a personal note, my husband laughs at me because I will, as you may have noticed already, I'm going to quickly go off the deep end into the nerd side of things. And he's like, whoa, someone just said like, oh, I like whiskey too. Like, can you just reel it in a little bit and just start slower? And I was like, oh, but it's so cool. So yes, I understand.
Yeah.
Yay. Nerds unite.
Yes.
What'd you get off it, Chad?
Well, with me, I'm definitely I get more when I'm doing like an A/B test. So I'll have more opinion once I start into batch 2, and I'll be going, oh, okay, I like this for this reason.
I think personally, and Robbie, I'd be interested in your opinion on this. When I'm doing my own tastings, I might order them differently, but we can certainly do it this way. I think too that 1 and 4 are going to be a really good contrast. And 2 is just so different from them, I feel. But let's just see how we go. Let's see how it goes.
I think 1 is way more tobacco than I thought it would be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's a super tobacco, but it's also got the like a real sugar. If you've had a cream soda, like a good one, like that you would get at a deli, it has that mouthfeel coming on the back end of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And okay, Chad, do you have anything else that you wanted to add, or you want to compare? Because I totally agree with the inside.
I'm going to go with the comparing, but I can see the that cane sugar feel to it on the cream soda.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's what I think a lot of people don't get when you say single malt or malt whiskey. They just think Ardbeg, or you know what I mean, like overly peated. They don't realize how sweet it can be.
Yes, exactly.
You obviously it's not going to be as sweet as bourbon, but it's a different kind of sweet. I think it's a more natural flavor of sweet. Yeah,
well, and it's different too based on what you're finishing. If you have a Sauterne or a Madeira finish, which I personally adore, that's you're like, oh my gosh, this is like candy. This is fantastic. I love this for that. But if you want something that's a deeper, darker, richer, maybe not with that sweetness, and you want a little more malty or nutty notes or something, like, okay, I don't want a wine finish. I want maybe ex-bourbon or something else. And the new oak. So something else, I'll just give a little bit of premise. So this one is 3 years old, and all of our whiskeys start out their first 3 years in new American oak barrels, high toast, low char, which we can go into that geekery too if you like. Would love to. And that really affects kind of what comes out in the flavor. And our mash bill as well, the majority of it is going to be pale malt. And this one, I think it's 90, I have it somewhere, 90%, no, 88. And then there's crystal malts, Munich malts, and pale chocolate malts. So some of those dark coffee, chocolate, almost smoky notes come from the pale chocolate malt. The crystal and Munich lend more to like a caramely, and I think what you're indicating about the sweetness, I feel like that's where that's coming from. That kind of lends like a creamy, sweet flavor to it, which comes out more in some of the later expressions, because this one is just like big and bold and it's kind of in your face, I feel like.
And you're still talking about the first edition.
This is just one. Yep, just one on its own. This one, I feel like it has a deeper, darker, richer, almost smoky quality to it.
There's a spice to it that like Richard touched on with the tobacco that you can
Mhm.
tell without that spice it would be ridiculously sweet, but that spice really is there that to balance it out.
It almost
Yeah.
like it kind of hides it up front, like, oh, it's going to be spicy. No, it's not. You know, like it gives you a little switcheroo.
It like rounds it out, I feel like, nicely. And that is something I would say baking spice and caramel notes are the kind of the through line of our mash bill. You can kind of see that in every expression and taste it. And then we layer flavors kind of on top of that based on the maturation, which is really fun to play with. That's a great base. So we make for some fun
where did
flavors.
the concept of this come from, of doing same mash bill but just changing environmental,
Mhm.
levers, as you call them? Where did that come from?
Phil, he just really wanted to make whiskey. He went and did a course at Harriet Watt in Edinburgh, where a lot of like master distillers go. But he didn't want to do that. He was trying to figure out a different approach. There's so many people who make great single malts in the world, and he wanted to just take a different stab at it. And he came up with this concept, and it's sort of, to me, it reminds me of like gypsy brewing or something like that.
It's, I mean, but more than that, I guess, and maybe this is my own just not knowing, but I've never heard of another distillery that does single malt that then blends different types of malt together.
Oh, sure you have. You just maybe didn't know it.
I guess I know it. It's not something you hear about. I mean, there was a huge fight back in Scotland like 10 years ago when Glenmorangie was doing like overly roasted chocolate malt.
Yeah, their Signet. Oh, it's so good.
So good, but the what was it? The official Scotch whatever didn't want to recognize it because, and they had to go and fight for it, saying, "Look, this historically would have happened because no one was rich enough to be like, oh, we over roasted our malt, throw it out and brew it again."
Right, they're thrifty. Yeah, so I mean, other ones come to mind right off the bat. It's something that American single malts are doing more.
Yeah.
It's not as common in other parts of the world, and certainly not in Scotland, because the Scotch Whisky Association is has a lot of restrictions. So that's kind of the great thing about the US, right? We don't have official rules yet about single malt. They're working on them, but they're not going to be so tight that we can't still be creative. But Westland here in Seattle, they do this. Copperworks, also in Seattle, does this. I know that a couple other ones use different varietals of malts, so it's can get kind of tricky talking about it. So the ones that I'm discussing are specialty malts, and they're ones that are used, and you know this, Robbie. They're ones that are used in making different types of beer. So the pale chocolate malt is going to be used in stout and things like that. So it's still used in the first part of the process, and then it's just distilling. The thing is, it's not very efficient in terms of sugar and like how much alcohol you would get out of it. But obviously the flavor has a big impact, and that's what we're really going for. Because go ahead.
Oh no, it's interesting to see, like we've talked about on the show before, but American single malt is this really cool category that is going to be the first category in the world that's ever been defined by the artist who created it, as opposed to a government, saying, oh, well, bourbon has to be this. And so, you think Scotland single malt whiskey, it has to be from one farm, it has to be from one season, these things, like having different kinds of malts completely not available to them. So it's just, super cool.
Yeah, it's really fun.
So you want to try to compare it to number 4 now?
Yeah, let's do that. I like to say that, well, no, I won't say that yet. I want to have impressions first.
I think the chocolate scent is way more now on number 1 when you smell it compared to number 4, the 4th edition.
Comparing them is so fun. You get it.
I definitely say 4 is way fruitier.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not as it's more, I hate to use it, it's more tame compared to 1. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But maybe it's the edges are a little more folded over.
Yeah. With like the first one, I got black cardamom really strong.
Yeah.
And this one's like caraway.
It's to me, it's a savory spice instead of a baking spice. So I get like a black pepper in there and some other things that are not. Normally, I would get more cinnamon and nutmeg and clove, but not in 4. 4 is like savory.
You're hitting the nail on the head. It's like black pepper, caraway, and a bunch of other like real savory.
Mm-hmm. Almost, and there's no rye, but I think rye bread. But it's got none of that. It's the same. This is the same juice. So it is 2 years older. It's 5 years old.
You know what? The nose is sourdough. You said rye bread, and I don't know why, but it just put in my head. Like it's total. You get that like sour tang, and it's 100% sourdough now.
If you would have told me number 1 had rye in it, I totally would have believed you.
Yeah. All right, Chad, what do you think comparatively?
4 is softer on the tongue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like almost back to back. It's like almost has like an oil to it. I don't know. It doesn't hit you at all. And there's not
it's higher proof too by a little bit, but
there's you don't have that sugary on the back end at all.
Yeah.
Learn how to work a camera.
Yeah. Yeah. This one is 48.5% ABV. Well, the first one, batch 1 is 45%.
The black pepper. I like the black pepper to it. So
this is one, if I have people who are bourbon folks and they're like a little interested in single malts, I direct them to this one. I'd say this is kind of a nice little step if you're not sure about single malts and you don't want something that's peated, but it's a good little intro. And I also like to say that this, to me, is if batch 1 then went off to college and came back, that's what this tastes like to me. It's kind of matured and rounded, and the 2 extra years that it then spent in an ex-bourbon barrel made
it's
a big
almost
difference.
Closer to almost a little more refreshing than the other one. Goes down a little bit better.
Yeah. Or I should say, sorry, it's 6 years old, not 5. Sorry, 6 years old.
Number 1 is a good steak wine, whiskey, and number 4 is a good fish whiskey. Like it's more delicate. Like, you know what I mean? Like if you had a halibut with some cream sauce, number 4, whoo, that would I think I'd do it right there.
Yeah, come over for dinner. This sounds great.
Barbecue at Richard's.
Yeah, like we're gonna do a food pairing. It's gonna be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, people always ask me like, what whiskey do you pair with your steak? I'm like, yes, that one.
What do you have? Yeah.
It's weird. Number 4 at the end, it must be the second hit in that bourbon barrel, but definitely get hints of like brown sugar on the back end. Like not right away, and not like I'm talking like 20 seconds later.
Yeah, it'll after you're taking a breath and it's just sort of sitting in your mouth. Yeah, it'll change in the glass too, of course.
And that's one thing I'll definitely say about, I think, American single malts compared to like Scottish or Irish, is you don't get that medicinal,
right?
Like, you know what I mean? Like I don't mind it, and sometimes I like it, but it definitely turns a lot of people off. That it to realities, it tastes like a Band-Aid, or it smells like a Band-Aid. You know what I mean? And you don't get that, or I haven't gotten it yet with an American single malt.
And you probably wouldn't unless it was a peated whiskey and it was peat from an island or a coast, because all of that comes from kind of the vegetation that's in the peat. So it's unlikely you would get that unless they are sourcing peated malt in that way. Yeah, but I agree. That's a pretty particular, you need to like brace yourself or want that. I have friends who really enjoy that. And I was like, great, you can have the Lafroig that I have. And I'll have a little bit, when it has like a PX cask or something like that on it. I like that kind of finish. Sweet peat is my favorite, but yeah, I say first aid kit on fire is how I describe that.
Well, see now, like I have a lot of people in my group that they only drink bourbon. Like they've ventured into rye, and I'll sneak every once in a while like a Dalmore Portwood or some American single malt. And like, oh, that was pretty good. What was that? Well, it's single malt. and they get pissed at me. But Wanderback will be now beginning slipped in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
So-
I honestly think the first edition, like there's people that they like the death bourbons that are like, like me, like Booker's that are napalm, that are just hot. I think number one, if you have someone who likes high heat bourbon, I would definitely recommend number one, because you get that spice and that heat that you get with higher proof bourbons, I think.
Yeah.
Is
There's
the one still around and available?
is what?
Is the one even still around and available?
No,
Sorry,
unfortunately not. So it's one thing that that's another kind of unique thing for us, since we make all of our whiskey in batches like this. It's kind of one and done, very bespoke. So we're not repeating anything. That's kind of part of the experiment. And our batches are anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 bottles, and that's it. So it's small, but it's so if you like one, I recommend getting it. And so I have like my library that I keep, and I'm like, okay, those are my ones that I'm not opening until something spectacular happens. But having it just for kind of archival purposes.
Do you have issues like distributing them, or is it kind of just local in-house kind?
No, it's actually a pretty good mix. So we do sell in Oregon and lot in stores. So, OLCC has a bunch of our stuff. And then, and I have found that 2, 3, and 4 you can still find on OregonLiquorSearch.com. So that's helpful. In Washington, we sell in Total Wine. And then otherwise, anyone else can just order online. So we do have online distributor as well. So it just matters on the state.
See, and that's is I'm going to jump into the collector. See, you're hitting, when you do, 1,500 bottle runs, that's, you know what I mean? Like that's in my mind, like you're getting all the people that with really bad FOMO, fear of missing out. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
But I gotta get it. And I think that's brilliant. You know what I mean? It's like you can get it, and even like George T. Staggs and all that, like, well, what year is it? You know what I mean? Like, and so I think that's brilliant, doing small limited runs like that.
Yeah. Well, and part of
I
it
feel
too
like
is, oh, go ahead.
Richard just cracked a little bit when I was like, no, there's number one out. And he's like, wait, what? You didn't tell me this.
Yeah, I know. So it's kind of amazing you have a bottle for that, because that one's been out for quite a while. But yeah, there was something else I was going to say about the availability.
Like limited runs,
Yeah. Oh, our size. I mean, the thing is too, our size. We are maturing everything on the farm down in Hood River, and it's not a huge space, So we're pretty limited on our barrels, and we have stuff that's aging will come out in 22, 23, 24, 25 kind of stuff. But we've we run out of space, so we can only go so big. But yeah, it makes it fun.
And we promise we won't tell anybody. How many barrels do you have hidden in the back that are maybe a bit older than what you usually put out, that maybe you guys tucked in the back for?
I wish I could tell you that we actually have some of those. I looked. We unfortunately do not. I asked Phil. We do not have any forgotten barrels. We do so one of the things we did last year though, we had, when we released batch 4, we also released a Founder's Reserve, which was a single cask. And that was, again, it was barrel strength, and it was all of the still Westland spirit. And it was, oh my gosh, it was like a gingerbread cookie, not overly sweet, but super spicy and really, really good. That was our HH10. And we're having one more Founder's Reserve that's coming out sometime this spring, and that is the last of the Westland Spirit. We have no more after that. It's going to be a single cask, and that's it. And I've done the tasting notes, and it's bottled and all that, and so we're going to have it out soon. But that's it. Otherwise, we have no other stuff that's just like older things just sitting around. Otherwise, it's all got plans. I know.
Oh well.
Well, let's drink to that sadness. Let's try number 2.
Yes. Okay. So now we know Robbie and I both love 2. So we hope that you love it as well. And this one is higher proof. This one is 50%. And it was finished in an X rum barrel, and it's 4 years old. So we're going a little younger too. So it's going to have a bit of a kick.
It's Christmassy. Where'd Richard go?
He needs to jump back on, I guess. He smelled it and he had a heart attack and just decided to.
Like too sweet. No,
he likes sweet.
Yeah, this one. Well, Chad, what do you think?
It's like Christmas spices.
There's a lot of ginger in this one. I think a lot of ginger,
Okay.
like a fresh ginger, not like a
It's
gingerbread.
like, yeah. It's yeah. Ginger is definitely there.
Mm-hmm. This one to me, I feel like you get a little hint of the darkness of batch one, and the baking spice that's there, and then it's quickly balanced out by kind of the brightness of the ginger and the sweetness of kind of the rum barrel, and it's a really good foil. I feel like it's in balance that way, but got a good kick.
What I love about this one is I've never ever as a bartender thought to put ginger and vanilla together as like two big flavors. And this is like, to me, that's what you get is like vanilla, ginger, boom. And it works.
Yeah.
It works really well.
That's really good.
Yeah, Richard, what do you think? We haven't asked you yet.
It just took my first sip. That is, it hides the spiciness on the nose. Like you don't know that's coming.
Right.
Like that first one, it literally smells like the most decadent vanilla icing.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're in a bakery, you're like, oh yeah, you're making some vanilla shit. Okay.
I love that smell.
The vanilla. I don't know what you're going to use with it, but I smell the vanilla shit.
Oh, see, I'm gonna. It's got just. It gets hot and then it gets tobacco-y, and then it smooths back out to that vanilla that the nose has at the very end. It's good. And you guys,
there is gingerbread with it. It has a gingerbread, a Christmas gingerbread, and too sweet for, let's say, gumdrops in there. But it's good.
Yeah. It's funny. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're good.
I was going to say it's interesting. I agree with you on kind of the baking spice, the ginger that makes it Christmassy. If you had batch 3, that one to me is like because it has a port finish. It has a lot of dried fruits and a lot of orange peel in it, but a lot of and juicy fruit. It's just got a lot more juicy fruits going on in it, and that one to me is like, oh, that's a Christmas pudding. That's what that would taste like. Got it. Weird to say as an American. I know I'm not a Brit, but yeah.
What was that?
We're a Brit.
90, it was not okay to like fruit puddings and Christmas puddings, and now it's coming back, so you're fine.
Yeah. See it on Great British Bake Off. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Two's definitely my favorite. I think it's the most complex out of all of them, and they're all very complex. You know what I mean? They're not like they're not just one hit wonders. You know what I mean? I think I forgot. There's a term for it. I think someone called it sit down whiskey, where this is a bottle you're gonna have to sit down and talk to for a while. You know what I mean? Like you're not gonna get all of his story in one glass. Like you're gonna have to keep coming back to it a couple times.
Yeah. I like to call more than a sipping whiskey, almost an intellectual dram. I like to think of that, where it's okay, there's more notes to this, and it's not something like a session or something where you're going to sit down and just drink it. You need to, I want to pay attention to this. And every time it's a little different. Yeah, I agree. I love that. Would you mix anything with these, Robbie? I'd be curious to hear from your bartender's perspective. What if you would want to do anything with this, and if so, what?
So first I'll say there in my mind, there's nothing that's taboo. Like there is no ingredient that's too fine and refined to mix with. Like everything's an ingredient at the end of the day. It's just, do you have the bankroll to pay for it? Do you have the guts to go in and potentially destroy something on a couple times? And that has, been, but yes, to me, I think off the bat, like I want to make a penicillin with, this one, like really like refined penicillin. Towards the end of Botanist's career, we started playing with this idea of aging. I'm still playing with it, so I don't really know how to convey it. But I call it like aging cocktails on the lees as like a wine term. So what happened is because of the being on the deck up there and having, that massive space, we started pre-batching everything for speed of service. Well, when we closed, a lot of those cocktails were just sitting around, and the citrus and all the stuff had separated out of them. So you have like this bottle, yay tall, and all the citrus would be on the bottom, the cocktail at the top. So I started pouring those out and then tasting it. And you had this very refined cocktail, something I've never tasted before of the likes. The acidity would be there. The sweetness would be there. And we tend to use a lot of honey. So the honey would also change the palate. It'd be a little bit thicker and a little bit more smooth. To me, I want to make a penicillin with this one and let it just rack out, let it, age on its lees, let the citrus and the ginger particles fall out, strain it out, and have that as like this pourable, perfect penicillin where the ginger and the lemon and the honey is all infused into it. And then age that in something fun like a amphora.
Well, that sounds delightful.
What's a penicillin? I got it after a couple trips to Thailand, but you know what I mean? I'm not sure what the
duly named after that actually. So there's a bartender by the name of Sam Ross. Penicillin is probably, on par with a Manhattan, as you can pretty much go to any bar and be like, I'll have a penicillin. Every bartender's just be like, yeah, I know what you're talking about. And we'll have the ingredients to make it, but it's whiskey, lemon, ginger, and honey, all things to kind of make you feel better when you're not feeling so great. So usually it's a ginger syrup, some honey syrup, and then a good healthy dose of lemon and an even healthier dose of whiskey. Usually the whiskey's split between like a rye whiskey and a smoky peaty something, or like a more gentle single malt whiskey and a little more peaty single malt whiskey as well.
It's interesting you talk about that, because I just did around the summer solstice with our batch 5, I did sort of like a hot toddy, but it wasn't even quite a syrup, but with lemon peel and a bunch of like raw spices, put them in a pot and like kind of made a watery syrup with it, and then mixed that with the whiskey, and it was.
Got one for you. Do you have
phenomenal.
An Instapot?
Oh yeah.
Do that syrup in your Instapot.
Really?
Yes.
We're
talking
now.
So we used to make a syrup. We were trying to come up with a new gimlet, and we're beating our heads. And finally, our chef at the time was like, "Why don't you just put treacle in there?" And we all kind of go, "Huh?" He goes, "No, treacle. The Brits, they put it on their syrup." And we're like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Well, it's like this like candied lime syrup or citrus syrup that you take, lime wheels and you put them in syrup and simple syrup, and then you reduce that simple syrup until it breaks twice. And that's like a really complicated bakery term. Basically, you have to raise it to a certain temperature, and then it like turns one way, and then it starts to crystallize, and then it starts to re-liquefy again. But it's like ultra caramelized, but then it starts to, then at that temperature, you hit it with the citrus, and it starts to form these crystalline structures because you evaporate all the water out of it. But once you hit that citrus, all that crystalline structure starts to break and then reconfigure itself into a sugar. Well, then we figured out that we could just do the whole thing in an Instapot, and we didn't have to sit here and watch and monitor and like temperature control the whole thing, because we got it down to like, we knew the temperature, and like we'd be sitting there with a thermometer going, "Ow, hands burning," like 300 plus degrees, shit. Oh, there we go. Throw the citrus in. And after that, we're like, Instapot, no, screw this. Because the pressure just makes it so that everything boils at a hotter temperature. But because the liquid can't escape, you don't ever run the risk of burning it.
That is amazing.
So you throw it in there. It takes 35 minutes. So you throw it in, hit go, and then you walk away and come back later. And it's like, oh, perfect. And 2, we started them playing with like different types of spices, citrus medleys, not just lime, but it ginger, you name it. We started being able to make a lot of really fun stuff. Carrot butter was the other thing that we started making. We'd take peeled carrots, throw it in with a little bit of salt and water. It just turned into baby mush, put it in a blender, blend it up, push it through a fine filter, and then you put that in a cocktail, and you had the most like sweet carrot, because you could actually caramelize the carrot sugars and pull this vanilla flavor out of a carrot.
How much Cypress Hill was playing when you guys were figuring all this stuff
out? That's just the way my mind works. And it's like, we're all sitting around, like one of our bartenders was like, I want to come up with a carrot cocktail, and we're like pouring carrot juice, and I'm like, this is bullshit. Like, this is like V8 like carrot crap.
Gross.
We need a much more like refined carrot taste. And so we started thinking about, like, let's just like take carrots and like make it into a jam, for lack of a better term. Like, let's get real raw carrot flavor and like let's turn the sugars in the carrot and pronounce those without adding more sugar into it. And that's how we came up with carrot butter.
That's awesome. Yeah. Like taking on sort of the Maillard reaction that's going to happen in there with that is awesome.
That's how my mind works. Like distillation, fermentation, all of that is just, it's chemistry. It's understanding how these things work at different temperatures, at different pressures, at different levels, how the yeast interacts with it, or how the bacteria interacts with it. And then going, okay, well, if this flavor is going to go with this, and this flavor is going to go with this, I just need to figure out ways to create these flavors in this. So how do I figure out how to make carrots taste like vanilla carrots? I'm not going to sit here and add vanilla bean to it. I'm going to figure out how to use science or how to use temperature to modify what's already in there. Mm-hmm. Caramel sugar vanilla is different than a vanilla bean vanilla. So, yeah. Everyone just like how crazy Robbie is.
Nerd.
I love it.
Fuck. Never get him drunk at a bar and never let him talk.
He's going to be talking about vegetables and instant fats, and it's going to be a whole thing.
At my new bar, I literally told him, I'm like, look, if you ask me a question instantaneously, I feel very, very strongly compelled to answer your question. So 2 things. 1, you really need to decide on whether you want the answer to that question or not, because I will give it to you. Second of all, tell me whether you want the long answer or the short answer, and do it quickly, because once I go into it, you're not going to get me to shut up.
Just make me the drink.
You're like, I asked for an old fashioned, but okay.
Well, it's like my son's like, why don't you ever ask me anything? And I'm like, because questions come with answers, and sometimes you just don't want to know.
Sometimes ignorance is bliss.
Well, so how are you guys doing and enjoying, and like, what are your hurdles of the big whiskey boom that's going on right now, and being a smaller distillery and whatnot, not in Kentucky, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Well, the supply chain issues are ours as well. That is certainly an issue we're running into with getting stuff to make sure we can bottle and cork said bottles. So that's a challenge that is certainly affects us as well as the big boys. I think also because of our batching process and everything, kind of figuring out our timing and ordering of barrels, because we're smaller, it can be harder for us to get barrels sometimes because we're not doing a massive order. That can be a little tricky. But I think what it is for all of us really is just a passion project that we love to work on. So it's not something where it's such a heavy burden where our, bottom line matters, of course, but because we're smaller, it's not a major make or break kind of thing. We get to really focus on our flavor and what we want to put out for folks. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'd have to think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the fact that you guys aren't running a full distillery gives you a lot more freedom to know this is what the batch is going to taste like, You know what I mean? Like it takes a lot of the risk away as well as a lot of the overhead. So do you think that gives you guys a lot more freedom to do what you want and how you want?
Yeah, I think so, because it's our big, sorry, my cat is attempting to join us. No, buddy. No, thank you. I think that's totally true. And the fact that we get to do our production in kind of chunks of time, it's not constant production, but then the maturation where there's monitoring. We don't just stick it in the bottom of the barn and then walk away and do nothing with it. There's lots of work that happens, but it's a little easier that it doesn't, we're not managing stills, we're not managing fermentations. That certainly makes it easier, where we can just focus on the maturation part of it and the flavors there, and then figure out kind of the bottling and all that stuff. I think that definitely helps. We get to focus on the back half. And the other stuff only happens now and then because we do the production of that in smaller chunks. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, you said you did Westland and then Balcones?
Balcones. And then we have two other ones that are sitting in the barn as well. I think I can say that one of them is from, it will come out probably in maybe 2023. Done in collaboration with a distillery in Virginia. If you know any there.
I might.
You might. Maybe in Lovington. And
there could be one there.
Could be one there. And then we also did a local project where we grew barley on the farm, and we distilled that at McCarthy's. So that one is maturing in the barn and is waiting patiently. So that one, I'm not sure when that one's going to come out. It'll be a few years yet, because we definitely like to do a base of at least 3 years maturation and then kind of going on from there. Luckily, like we were talking about with the temperatures, that really helps. So it makes 3 years feasible, and definitely enough time to get good flavor out of the whiskey. And then kind of beyond that is just great layers and such. But yeah, so that's kind of what we have coming up down the pipe. But I'm really excited. I've been doing pulled samples of those and kind of following their maturation. And it's so interesting how the flavors change over the course of months, in a short span of time too. It's really exciting.
Now, are you guys starting to get calls from like other places? Like, because, whiskey's so much booming right now. Hey, can we get your stuff? We hear you doing stuff out there. Is that more now than you have seen previously?
Do you mean people wanting, can you clarify?
Like people from like before, 10, 15 years ago, there was 5 major whiskeys reality wise. Now everybody's doing whiskey and more people are seeking out craft whiskey. So, I mean, have you noticed an increase year to year on people from Maine or whatever, other places that would have never, that aren't from the Northwest, going, hey, can we order your stuff? How do we get it?
Yeah, we have. And actually, the one really good thing that came out of this whole global situation that's happening, it was a little earlier than last year, but we really dug into kind of virtual tastings. And we did a lot of those. And that was actually the reason that I came on to Wanderback, was my starting job with them, was doing that. And it really allowed us to have a bigger reach than just local groups in the Pacific Northwest. And we also did whiskey tastings with whiskey clubs and different whiskey groups, all virtually. And it really allowed us to share that. And they go, oh, okay, now I'm really interested, didn't even know. And now we have fans across the country, which is really helpful and nice, because then we get to just, all we want to do is share good whiskey. That's all we want to do. And that has really helped. I think there's been a lot of interest in that sort of thing, and that American single malt is a growing category. So it's really fun to talk about it, to learn about it, to try to educate and explain how it's different. Because, the first question I always get is, so it's a bourbon, right? I'm like, no. And like, well, I like whiskey, I don't like bourbon. I'm like, okay, let's back up. And it's fine. Everybody has to start somewhere. Nobody comes out of the womb, knowing all that stuff and all the reviews and all the whiskey explanation. So it's a little weird. So explaining all of that and the education piece, I think is kind of one of the bigger challenges for American single malt as a category, is explaining why we're not Scotch and why we're not bourbon. And it's not to say we're better or worse. We're just our own category and what makes us exciting and interesting. So you should try it, that kind of thing.
And I think that's, I'll go for it, Richard.
I was gonna say, I definitely think we're far away from education is the first part. I was on a flight recently and they're like, oh, would you like something to drink? I was like, yeah, I'll take a whiskey. And she handed me Jack Daniels. And I was like, is there any other one? She goes, no, that's the only whiskey we have. And I'm like, oh, okay. And the next guy, she handed him a Buffalo Trace. And I thought you said you didn't have any whiskey. She goes, it's not. That's bourbon. And I was like, okay, well, so is, okay, I had a nosebleed and had to stop. And I'm just like, okay.
Like, actually, if you
know what?
it's fine. Just don't worry about it.
What flight were you on had Buffalo Trace?
Yeah, sounds great.
I mean,
don't fly Frontier. What?
I always find it funny because as a bartender, I get the best job in the world in the sense of like I get to come up with these crazy weird concoctions and sell it to you and be like, it's a cocktail. And everyone's like, I'll try it. Whereas if I go to a distillery and they're like, we created this new thing. It's from sunchokes. And we fermented sunchokes and distilled it. Everyone's like, so is it a whiskey? No, it's a new spirit. We don't really have a category. Oh, I only like whiskey. And
try it.
And I'm just like going, we're doing the same thing, except my job's simpler because I do it like right here and now. You have to wait, X amount of time for, things to happen via yeast and then, distillation and then aging and whatnot. And it's a lot more risky, but it's the same thing. It's going to taste of something that is alcoholic and it's going to have a sweet note. And it's going to have a bitter note. It's going to have spice notes and it's blah, 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 herp, derp. But somehow you put cocktail on the label and everyone's like, I'll try that. That sounds interesting. And you're like,
well, and then you make it pretty. It's in a pretty glass. It's a pretty color. It's got pretty decorations on it. It's, you're like, ooh, I agree. I love a Glencairn. Don't get me wrong. It's my favorite thing. But, it seems different. That's an interesting thought on that. And you're right that there's so many fun ways that people are experimenting with, macerated, flavored spirits of different things. And it's, there's, do you know Scratch Distillery that's up in Edmonds, Washington? Kim is great. Oh my gosh. So much good stuff. Really. Well, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, they're great. And then, the one that like continually racks my mind, I'm just like, wait, you did what? Is there's a distillery out of Copenhagen called Empirical Spirits.
Oh, I don't know that.
And so do you know the restaurant called Noma?
Yeah.
So some of their science department decided to, offshoot and create a distillery where they take barley, but instead of using the natural enzyme in the barley to malt it, they take a koji that they brought from Japan, and it mutated, and now it malts their barley, and then they have a giant rotovap still that they distill this stuff at very specific temperatures, and then age it in who knows what, and then infuse it with random flavors. So they have, they just have a bunch of really cool ones that you can't categorize them in any category. You can't categorize them as a liqueur, a whiskey. Yes, it's barley based, but it's not whiskey.
It's a spirit.
It's a spirit. But you listen to what they're doing, and they have yeast samples from all over the world. Literally, Lars is one of the owner's names. He goes to Africa or South America collecting random fruits just so he can pick off the yeast and store them in a frozen, chamber and decide like, okay, we're going to try this new yeast on things. And those are the kind of projects that get my mind going, well, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
But also it's really sad because, only the nerds like me are going to be like, yes, I want to try that. Whereas everyone else is like, I don't want to touch that. Yet if he had just called it a distilled cocktail, everyone would be like, yeah, I'm going to try that.
Yeah. So. That's so fascinating. I just sat my exams for the WSET Spirits Level 3. Do you know that at all? Yeah. So the koji stuck with me. Like, oh, that would be so interesting.
I'm lost on exams for what?
So koji is this, like, technically it's a mushroom. It's a fungus, and historically it's been used on rice for sake. It's also used in Korea and a couple of other Asian cultures. But basically, what happened was, in order for you to make an alcohol, you have to have a sugar. But the most complicated and the best alcohols come from when you get that secondary sugar, i.e., you take a starch and you convert the starch over to a sugar. In the whiskey world, we've always done this through barley, because barley has a natural enzyme that exists within it that does that job. It converts the sugar. And yeah. And so every great bourbon out there has at least 10% barley in their bills, simply because that's the absolute minimum amount of barley percentage that you can have in a bill and get that enzyme to go at it. And they've done studies where the enzyme that comes from the barley will create longer chains of sugar, which creates a more complex whiskey at the end of the day. Whereas if you use like a store-bought enzyme, it cuts up the sugar very rigorously, so you get 1 to 2 particles, and it creates a very simple and very kind of like lackluster whiskey. But now people are just starting to experiment with this mold that Japan and Korea and I think China cultivated to turn rice, because rice didn't have that, into a sugar. But technically, as a mold, it can grow on any starch. I mean, you can put it on potatoes and it will turn potatoes into sugar. You can put it on barley, you can put it on corn, wheat, you name it, and you can mutate it to go after that stuff. But it gives it this really cool, like, herbal and mushroomy and earthy notes, as opposed to just the one sweet note of barley. And then from there, you can choose a yeast, and you can choose all these other cool things. And with empirical spirits, the funny story that I love is the guy who was growing the koji in Japan made it listen to classical music, and that's what it thrived on. But then it went to Copenhagen, and something happened, and classical music was killing it. So being that they're in Copenhagen, and why the hell not, they started playing death metal to it, and it picked right up. Because what the hell?
Why not?
Who doesn't prosper a little bit of Slayer? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, there was this Instagram video of like, you win if you don't bang your head, and this poor guy was listening to every great death metal song, and he's like.
The other thing to say about that too is the enzyme comes from malted barley, not unmalted. So when you have your Irish whiskeys that are made with unmalted barley, they either have to have malted in there as well as part of the bill, which is a whole categorization thing, or they have the external enzymes as well to do that. But yeah, in China, Baijiu, they use Q for that, which are these bricks. It's crazy. It's so different than Western distillation, but it is fascinating because they pull very different flavors out of all their stuff.
And that one, it has both the koji and the yeast in the same brick or ball or whatever.
Mm-hmm. So it's called parallel fermentation, I think. Anyway,
Yes.
So to answer your question, Chad, there's the Wine and Spirits Education Trust. They have courses. So they have a wine one, they have sake, and they also have spirits. And they have different levels for that. So they get just more intense as you go along. And spirits level 3 is the highest level. And there's a lot of info in there, and it's a lot of science. And it's a lot of different spirits that I've never had.
What does that qualify you for? Is it more of a bragging rights?
To become a sommelier or anything?
Sommelier of that level?
Yeah, they don't have that, despite what you might see of like a bourbon sommelier. That's not like an actual official title like in the wine world, but it's certainly, you're more educated on all the different spirits. It's really helpful. I feel like it's especially useful for those who might be bartenders, things like that, or who are working in distribution and need to know and understand how these spirits are made, because you do raw materials, production, as well as labeling terminology, which is crucial to learn, and kind of the whole understanding it all. Yeah.
And Anna, you would know way better than me on all this, but I think the way I've always kind of explained it or understood it is like a sommelier is more of the service aspect of it. There's very much a hospitality of it drilled into you, whereas the W set is much more production. It's not about necessarily the tasting of things. It's much more understanding the science and the legality and all these things. And there is a tasting aspect of it too. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to, but it's much more about like, no, you're going to understand this science over here, which is going to lead to these flavors. So that
it's like having a degree. and getting a job if you're wanting to.
Yeah, it's something you can
Career
put
thing.
on your resume to say, this is why I know these things. Besides drinking out of my cabinet, here are the reasons I understand the spirit. Yeah, but you're right. There's not so much a service aspect, although it's definitely like a lot of people who are in the service industry take the courses.
Yes, I graduated from UNLV. In order to graduate with a hotel degree, you have to take the wine, beer, and distilled spirits classes, which was kind of nice. Like we can't send you out into hotel and restaurant management if you don't know what the hell you're drinking.
Yeah, because people will ask you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Turns out people like to know what they drink.
Heck yeah. Well, thank you for coming on. I am definitely a huge fan.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
can I tell you real quick about batch 5 and hopefully, and you can
Yeah,
let me
that's
know
the
if-
only thing we can buy, right?
The other ones you can find in certain stores in Oregon, certainly. Not online, unfortunately. We are sold out online of the other ones. But batch 5, we just released this past fall. Just a few months ago. Hang on, let me think. Time is weird. And that is the first one that's part of our Lone Star collection. So that's the first one done in collab with Balcones. So do you know much about Balcones and their...
I do.
You do? Okay. So you know they're crazy still, right?
Yeah, well, I know about the management change as well. There's a couple other things.
Exciting story. Yep. That not mine to tell, but yes, interesting to read about if you like some drama. So, but their actual, from a production standpoint, their setup is really unique. They're still had a crazy long line arm. So at the top of the still, you have a line arm that goes off into the condenser. And for those who may not know, just want to say, and a line arm is generally pretty standard length, but it went across a room. So they have a really unique, like lots of reflux, going to have a lighter spirit. They get a lot of fruit in their distillate. But when they moved to a new building, they wanted to replicate that, obviously, for consistency, but they didn't have enough space. So they coiled it around the top of the still. It is the craziest looking thing. But they obviously make a killer spirit. So,
and they didn't lose anything by doing that.
Right. It still worked the way they wanted it to work. So our distillate from them, it's mostly the same mash bill. We still have the same specialty malts in it. But the pale malt, instead of using sort of a standard pale malt, we used a Golden Promise, which is something they've used a lot of, which definitely lends more of a kind of creamy, oily mouthfeel to it. But I would say that batch 5, because we also changed a little bit in our maturation we used new oak barrels and then some reused as well. So it really lets the distillate come through. And it's not just all kind of wood spice that's in there. So for me, I get a lot of cinnamons and baking spices that come through even more, some caramels, butterscotch, a little bit. And then there's also a little bit of the cherry that is kind of a common theme in their spirits as well, comes through. A baked apple. It's really nice, a little bit of nuttiness as well. Absolutely love it. I got to help blend it, so that helps, but it's really good. And if you get we'll make sure you get a chance to try it. But it's really, you can see the through line from these, but it's still different because of the still and coming from Texas. So it's a fun comparison. Yeah.
I'll have to do it soon.
Yeah.
And we'll invite you back and you can bring us through the whole thing all over again.
Yeah, that'll be great. Well, thank you so much, guys. This was awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tolerating us and our nerdiness. If you need to find out anything more about Wanderback, how can people find out?
Yeah, I think you can always go to our website, which is wanderback.com, or check us out on Instagram. We do a lot of kind of our distillery life, farm life photos, as well as whiskey education. And it's just, our handle is just Wanderback. So you can find us there.
Thank you so much. We will see you all next week when Rich and Chad figured out what we're going to taste. I really want to get them into a extra añejo tequila. We'll see if we can make Richard stomach it. It's going to be fun. All right. Later, guys.
Bye.